Hey everybody, I'm Joe Killinger. I'm a real estate investor and entrepreneur, and we put these videos together every week to give you all the tips and insights from my experience over the last several years. So make sure you tune in and subscribe, and thank you. Most of you are going to remember George Pino, CEO of Commercial Brokers International. George and I were having a conversation earlier this week, and it was about 1031 exchanges. And honestly, I know enough about 1031 exchange. I know the basics of it, but he had some really detailed information I thought might be critical to you as real estate agents and to investors as well, because there are several ways you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble here. So I asked George to come in and walk us through his tips and insight. And so, thank you for coming in, George.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, there's a good number of 1031 exchanges going on right now.
Absolutely. And, I think what we'll do is start a little bit about what exactly is a 1031 exchange. We hear 1031 all the time, and it's actually the tax code 1031, which is for a tax-deferred exchange. And it's also a little misconception for a lot of people where they think that they can sell a property and the capital gains goes away. It actually is just deferred. Mm-hmm. So it's a mechanism that is built to facilitate more investment and sales within real estate so that an investor that owns property can sell the property, defer the capital gains, and transfer it to a new property.
Okay, so but now it has to be a like for like, right? Investment property for investment property. Mm-hmm. Can't be your single-family home into an investment property, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And like for like, there's also a misconception here that I'd like to clear up a little bit. A lot of people think like for like means that if you're selling a apartment building, it has to go to an apartment building, and that's not necessarily the case. Right. Like you said, and I think you said the key thing. Yeah. It's investment for investment. So right. Even land, raw land or farmland can be considered an investment.
Right.
And if you exchange that into another investment, whether it's a retail building, an office building, or an apartment building, that would satisfy the 1031 requirement.
Or a single-family home that you've been renting out, correct? Can be sold and put in.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why don't you give us some of your tips on best way to utilize a 1031 exchange?
Okay. Well, there's a couple of different 1031 exchanges. One is your traditional 1031 exchange, which allows you to sell your property. You have 45 days from the date of sale to identify a new property or up to 3 properties, and 180 days to close escrow on that property.
Okay.
Or couple properties.
Okay.
There's also what they call reverse 1031 exchange. Okay. And that's where you actually acquire the property you're exchanging into, what we call the upleg,
right,
first. Now it's actually held under title, under different, a third party holds it, and then you have to sell your property within 180 days, and then it transfers into it. Some people like that. It's not as common, but some people do like it because the biggest risk of a 1031 exchange is not being able to identify a property within 45 days and then close within 180 days, in which case it invalidates the entire exchange.
Are you finding that sellers are receptive to a reverse exchange?
It's the sellers that have the wherewithal to do so are a little bit more acceptable to it. And what I mean by that is you have to have the wherewithal to be able to actually acquire the upleg property before you sell your other property. And most sellers typically have the capital that they're going to use to acquire a property tied up in the equity in the property that they're selling. So a lot of them can't actually do that.
Yeah, it would be hard. Now, you have to identify 3 properties. What if you identify more?
Okay, well, good question. You actually don't have to identify 3. You can identify up to 1 to 3.
Okay.
And of those 1 to 3 that you identify, you have to acquire 1, 2, or 3 of those properties. It's up to you. So now the hard and fast rule, there are certain hard and fast rules with 1031 exchanges. And that is that the property that you're selling, or the property that you're acquiring, the sales price has to match the sales price of the property you're selling or be higher. If there's debt on the property, you have to have the same amount of debt or more, or less on the property. And essentially, you can't really get any cash out. If you get any cash out, it's called boot. And it doesn't.
That's taxed.
Well, only the boot is taxed.
Right.
It doesn't invalidate the whole 1031 exchange. Only the additional money that you get out of it gets taxed.
Okay.
So those are the hard and fast rules. It's a potential way that you could also increase the basis for your depreciation. So if you, for instance, if you sell a property that's $1 million, and you acquire another property at $1 million, your tax basis for depreciation purposes transfers to that other property. If you buy a property that's $2 million, however, because you maybe have depreciated your property that you're selling completely, and you have all this equity in it, you actually can have a additional basis added on top. It won't be the full $2 million,
Okay.
but it'll be the difference, and the difference based upon the valuation of the building itself. So it's a potential way that you can actually increase your cash flow even more so by increasing basis. And those essentially, that's one of the best parts about a 1031 exchange. What you do have to be aware of is if you identify more than 3 properties.
Yeah, and then what?
Well, there's what they call the 200% rule, and that kicks in.
This is the one I was like, I didn't know that.
So, if you identify 4 properties, let's say, and it's on your identification paper, you can identify more than 3 properties,
Right.
4, 5, 6, 10, as long as the total of
That's
the
ambitious.
total value.
Yeah.
It can be, but there are potential situations.
Sure.
But the total value cannot be more than 200% of what you sold your property for.
Okay.
So it's called the 200% rule. More importantly, and this is the one that can be very scary for a lot of people, and this is why we don't see this 200% rule enacted very often,
Right.
is that if you do not acquire every property, it invalidates the 1031 exchange completely.
So you have to acquire all of them then, if you go over 3.
It's all or none. It's all or none if you identify more than 3 properties.
That can be problematic.
It can be, and this is also where some of the issues may arise that people are not thinking about. For instance, let's say they're looking at an exchange and it consists of a portfolio of properties. It's marketed as one property,
Right.
but it may be 3 or 4 properties parceled together with separate legal parcels and addresses. In that case, you actually may have accidentally invoked the 200% rule, and if you don't close or something happens, it could be a potential problem. Especially if you identify other properties and you decide not to buy that portfolio and you buy another one instead. It can be an issue. So, those are things that you want to really work with your exchange company and your agent. Let them know ahead of time what your plans are, what you can do. And really, you need to, it's all about communication, because
Right.
if the agent doesn't know everything, I've had clients that have come to me, and I typically don't work with them in this situation, where they say, I'm looking for an exchange property, here's what happened. And I start asking questions. When did you close your downlay? How much did you close it for? What kind of debt? And if they can't answer those questions, then I'm a little concerned about just working with them.
Right. Right. And now state lines is something, so you sell a property in Nevada and you want to buy something in Texas. That exchange is still okay?
Absolutely.
State lines, they don't
State
matter.
lines don't matter, and even when you have capital gains tax within the state, it won't
Right.
matter.
Okay.
So, for instance, California has capital gains tax.
Right.
So if you sell a property in California, you not only owe federal capital gains tax, but also state capital gains tax.
Right.
You can defer both of them by transferring to another property, whether in California or elsewhere.
Okay. All right. Oh, that was some great information. Okay. So if you want to get hold of George, I'm going to put his information at the end of the video here, and you can reach out to him. George, thank you very much for coming in and enlightening us on all this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff there I wasn't really aware of. But please check out next week's video and do subscribe, because we're going to keep putting these out every week. Thank you.